Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how quickly our brains adjust when we hear someone speak with a different accent? Like when you are watching a movie and the characters suddenly switch to a new dialect, it takes a second to tune in. Well, this new study dives deep into that exact question. We all have this amazing ability to understand different people talking, even when their voices sound a bit different. But what happens behind the scenes in our brains when we encounter a new accent or a new speaker? Researchers are starting to figure out that our brains are actually retraining themselves on the fly to understand speech better. And this happens incredibly fast. This study used a really cool technique called pupillometry, which is basically measuring how much your pupil dilates. It sounds strange, but this can tell us how much cognitive effort or mental load is being used. When something is harder for your brain to process, your pupils tend to dilate more. So the big question here is, when we listen to someone with a second language accent, does our brain adjust its understanding of sounds in a specific direction, or does it become more generally flexible? The researchers wanted to see if exposure to an accent actually makes it easier for us to understand speech, and if that ease comes with a specific kind of change in how we perceive sounds. They focused on Spanish speakers who were listening to Spanish spoken with a French accent. Why Spanish and French? Well, the specific vowel sound they looked at, the Spanish A, can sound a little different depending on the speaker's native language. French speakers sometimes produce this, a sound a bit further forward in their mouth, making it sound a little like an E, or a bit further back, making it sound a bit like an O. So they divided their participants into 3 groups. One group, the control group, heard the Spanish, a sound as it is normally pronounced. The other 2 groups heard the A sound from the French accented speaker. One group heard a fronted A, meaning it was closer to an S sound, and the other group heard a backed, meaning it was closer to an O sound. This was the training phase. The idea was to see if hearing these slightly off-standard sounds would change how the Spanish speakers process them later. After this exposure or training, everyone did 2 tasks. The first task was a vowel identification task. They heard the A sound from a continuum, meaning it gradually changed from a classic A towards E or towards O, and they had to say which vowel they heard. This helps researchers see if the boundaries between vowel categories in their brain have shifted. The second task was a word recognition task, where they heard words and had to type them. This is where they measured the pupil dilation. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. For the vowel identification task, they found some evidence that the brain was trying to adjust its boundaries. For example, if you heard a fronted a lot, you might start hearing slightly more E-like sounds as. This is what we'd expect if the brain is recalibrating its categories. However, this recalibration seemed to be mostly in one direction, sticking to the pattern they heard during training. But the pupillometry results from the word recognition task told a different story. Here is the big takeaway. Even if the vowel in the word they heard at test was different from the slightly off vowel they heard during training, their pupils still showed less dilation. This means it was easier for their brains to process that word. For example, someone trained on a backed still got a benefit when hearing a word with a fronted and vice versa. This is the key finding. The ease of processing, measured by pupil dilation, happened regardless of whether the sound at test was in the same direction as the training sound. This suggests something beyond just pushing the category boundary. The researchers suggest 2 things are happening at the same time, or in parallel. First, there is the recalibration of sound categories. This is like your brain saying, okay, the speaker's A is a bit more towards E, so I'll sort of shift my A category slightly that way. This matches what they saw in the vowel identification task, though it was mostly a one-way street pushing the boundary in the direction of the training. Second, and this is where the non-directional benefit comes in, they propose a mechanism they call criterion relaxation. Think of it like this. Imagine your brain has a certain standard or criterion for accepting a sound as an A. When you are exposed to slightly unusual sounds, your brain doesn't just shift the strict boundary of what counts as an A. Instead, it becomes more lenient, more relaxed about what it will accept as an A. So even if the sound is a bit more A-like or a bit more O-like than usual, your brain is more willing to classify it as an A, or at least process it more easily because it is learned to be more flexible. This relaxation means that when you hear a word with a vowel that is a little unusual, but not exactly like the one you were trained on, it doesn't cost your brain as much mental energy. The pupil dilation was smaller for the trained groups across the board, indicating less effort, and this benefit was a bit bigger when the vowel in the word did match the direction of the training. But the crucial part is that a benefit was still seen even when it didn't match. So, what does this mean for us? It suggests that our brains are not only trying to get precise about new sounds when we listen to accented speech, but they also become more generally flexible. This flexibility, this criterion relaxation, is what allows us to understand speech more easily and with less mental effort. Even if the accent isn't exactly what we trained on, it is like your brain developing a broader tolerance for variation. Why is this important? Well, it helps us understand how we adapt to the real world of spoken language, which is full of variation. It could explain why, with a little bit of exposure, we can get used to the way someone speaks. And it doesn't just change our definition of a specific sound, but our overall processing becomes smoother. Now, a limitation to consider is that this study focused on a specific vowel sound in Spanish and the effect of a French accent. It would be interesting to see if this happens with other sounds, other languages, or even different types of accents. Also, the vowel identification task didn't show a clear two-way shift in category boundaries, meaning the evidence for a simple boundary recalibration was stronger in one direction. This makes the non-directional benefit in the pupillometry task even more compelling, as it suggests something beyond just boundary shifts is happening. Future research could explore how this criterion relaxation mechanism actually works. Is it about downweighting certain sound features, or something else entirely? And how stable are these changes over time? Overall, this study gives us a fascinating glimpse into the adaptive nature of our auditory system. It shows that our brains don't just rigidly adjust to accents, but they become more fluid and lenient, a truly impressive feat of cognitive flexibility. So, what do you think about these findings? Does this explain your experience listening to accents? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this dive into the science of speech perception, please hit that like button, subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of the human mind. Thanks for watching.